And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Hey, welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. I hope everybody had a great week this week. The jerk-off group on Facebook and social media is still up to their usual internet fantasies. I could go on a tangent about this again, just because it doesn't stop, but the only point I'm going to make, because I know how much they love it when I talk about them, because believe me, the minute I talk about them, they really get attention. They don't get attention on their own. And they don't because they sit in a little closet, typing on their computer like a telephone tough guy, pounding P letters, L letters like they're firing bullets. And they're firing lies. Nothing they say is true. What it is crap that A-Light tells them to say. Oh, okay, we'll put this to this will really make them upset. Oh, let's make a meme. Ha ha ha, this will be funny. Let's put Jeff Canarsie on a leash with John Gotti Jr. wearing a leather hat. Ha 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 ha, that's so funny. Punks. Anything I say, I'll say to your face. I think the rats know that. I think anybody that's ever met me will tell you that I will do that. I have no compunction about speaking my mind. I never have and I never will. I'm not a punk. I'm a man. If I got a beef with you, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk, or it's going to be something else. This microphone thing is an extension, right? Nothing I say here I wouldn't say to anybody else. But the only reason why I'm bringing this up at the top of the show is for one reason only. I had said a while back that my family was harassed. And they were, and I've proved it, and that's the case. They did this shit to somebody else. I don't know the specifics of it. Honestly, I don't. But I know who it was done to. And it's disgusting. You know, if you got a beef with me, take it up with me. Why you gonna call me? You call my uncle, my brother, my cousin, my second cousin by marriage, my ex-wife, if I had one. I mean, you're supposed to be a goddamn gangster, or let's use the phrase here, reformed gangster. First of all, you were never a gangster. Let's just get that out the closet. You weren't even a big drug dealer. You were a nickel and dime shitheel on the corner. Let's be honest about that. $5 to $10 million, my ass. If you made $5 to $10 million, I made fucking $100 million selling toothpicks. All right, so let's get that out of the way. But the idea that you're going to pick up the phone and find out somebody's identity, and you're going to call and harass their family. That ain't gangster, that's bitch. That's a straight up bitch move. And it's like stupid on like a million different levels. But this is not what gangsters do. This is not what reformed people do. It's what punk, coward, dog, jerk-off, degenerate, slimebag, rat fucks do. That's what they do. Because that's how he laughs. That's his laugh, right? He thinks the shit's funny. And it's like, listen, this may not be a well-known fact, but I'm going to bring it out anyway, right? Nobody knows your fucking name. You mention that name in Queens, either two things happen. People go, I never heard of that guy, or people know who he is and go, ha ha ha, that piece of shit, he's a nobody. I cannot tell you how many people in Woodhaven, Queens I've met who know who I am, and that name gets mentioned up or brought up. They laugh hysterically. Nobody's afraid of him, the sheriff. Nobody called him the sheriff. He was the Dunsky, the roided Dunsky back in the day. He has no respect in Queens. In fact, he made a statement on the Cultist show. Oh, I still live in my same neighborhood. No, you don't. You live in Jersey. You do not live in Queens. You don't even hang out in Queens. You go to Astoria, but you always have people surrounding you and bodyguards. That's the second thing. What the fuck you need a bodyguard for? Exactly. Because you're a bitch. And we're just going to state the facts, and that's the way it is, and I'm going to move on. Anybody that calls somebody's family is a bitch. That's a bitch move. It's always going to be a bitch move. A tough guy deals with it himself. Doesn't get his little minion friends to type horrible things about people that aren't true on the internet. Or pick up the phone and, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm a former hitman. First of all, you weren't even that. You weren't even that. So that's all I'm going to say about it. They can get pissed and they'll start their meme war again because that's what they're good at doing, and they're not even good at that. They can't copy, click, and paste the right way. It's like, I don't know. It's stupid. But the only reason why I brought this up at the top of the show was because they had no right reaching out to somebody who isn't really okay. This person I consider a friend. We're not that tight or whatever. But you don't reach out and mess with nobody's family. That's just, why would you do that? The only reason why it's done is to try to shut him up, and that's not cool, and that's not the way you do things. That's a weasel way out. That's a coward way out. This is the same guy that's a rat anyway, so I would expect that behavior from him completely. But I will not have them on my show just because it's not worth the attention. I'm not hiding nothing. So they can make all the assertions they want. Fuck them. That's the way I feel. And for all the people that follow this guy, realize he's gonna just chew you up and spit you out like he does everybody else. Sean Richard has been on the record saying that John ripped him off and took advantage of him. And this is a guy that lived next door to him, a guy who him and John went out every day to go do stuff together. And John has known him a long time. So if John rolled over on him, how you figure he's not going to roll on you? Smarten up, kids. Drop the zero and get with the hero. That's the way I see it. All right, moving on with the news. We got some Joey Merlino news. And more or less, okay. And this is going to be a thing because there's what I believe, what I'm going to report, and like assertions I could make, but I'm not. I'm going to try to stick with the facts here. Judge Sullivan, who's overseeing the Joey Merlino trial, is giving Merlino and his attorneys and the government till April 9th to make a decision. I believe the decision would be, are we going to trial or is this getting thrown out? There have been reports by Dave Stratweiser and George Anastasia and even Jerry Capisci for that, who I call the three stooges of mob media, saying that there was a letter sent between Merlino's lawyers and the government about some sort of back and forth about an agreement or whatever. I don't believe that to be the case. And also I'd like to say to the extent that Dave Stratweiser has made a history of saying things that are inaccurate. He reports on the Joey Merlino trial as if he was fucking there, and he wasn't. George Anastasia didn't ever go, and he sort of did the same thing. Jerry Capisci was there 2 days that I can remember. The first day he was there 10 minutes, was like laughing and left. And then the second time he was there, he got admonished by Judge Sullivan for refusing to stand up when the jury exited the courtroom, and that's a disrespectful thing to do, and the judge tongue-lashed him over that. So the idea that any of these three were at the trial for any length of time is absolute bullshit. So where does guys like Jerry Capisci get their information? Well, they get it from the government and the FBI. Let's be honest. That's where it comes from. So anything that he has a tendency of writing is usually accurate. Jerry's pretty accurate most of the time. I would say upper 90%, right? But the thing is that he's getting his information from the government and from prosecution, but he's not getting it from the defense at all. He's getting it from the FBI. So the idea that there's this imaginary deal that's going around is utter bullshit. I did reach out to Joey, and his exact words were, when I asked him about Dave Stratweiser, who was posting, they must be having some sort of plea agreement or et cetera, I asked Joey, he said he's nuts. That was his exact words. He's nuts. So that tells me it's not true. But what really fueled the rumors here was because the last person in this 49 defendant case of the East Coast Enterprise, blah, 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 Eugene Onofrio pleaded guilty to loan sharking and cigarette bootlegging. He received 27 to 33 months. But what makes it interesting is that prior to this trial date, the government had offered him like 4 years. He was going to fight it. Then he wanted his trial separate from Joey's. Makes sense. The government then offered him 27 to 33 months, and he took it. He took the sentence. It's 2 years shorter, and the reality is he's an old guy. So it makes sense. But what makes it even kind of worse for him was that the evidence against him versus Merlino was totally different. The Merlino evidence, they had to just rely on Rubio and assertions and innuendo. And with Onofrio, there was a bigger problem. And Rubio had brought along an undercover FBI agent who ended up getting so ingrained into this that he became Onofrio's driver for over a year. So that's a big issue. And this brings up a question. This guy was Onofrio's driver for a year, and he was an FBI agent, undercover at that, so he must have been privy to a lot of interesting shit. But yet Joey Merlino's name was never mentioned by this guy. So that's got to speak volumes to that. So the real question people have been asking me is that what's real and what's not. At this point, this is what I'm going to tell you, and this is the truth as I know it. To my knowledge, there is absolutely all of this plea deal crap is just bullshit. It's not true, and that's just what it is. That's exactly what it is. I did write an article over on the True Crime blog and Mob Talk Radio blog, and the argument I made is even if there was, so what? First of all, Joey's never taken a plea in his life. I don't think he's going to start now. The second thing is that if he were to get convicted in regular trial with this stuff, that's a lot of time. Joey's 55 years old, so you got to start to. Either way, it works down. Whether you're guilty or you're innocent, you got to kind of figure out what the amount of time you're going to end up doing is. At 55 years old, that could be a death sentence at that point. So I could never fault the guy for taking a plea in my life. That's the one thing that separates me from the belief from a lot of old school guys is a plea is a plea. You just do your time and get out. It's not like you're admitting anything. You're like, okay, guilty, fine, whatever. I'll go do my 4 years and get out. Better than 40 years. So even if somewhere down the line, that's a situation that Joey Merlino finds himself in, I couldn't be upset at that. I wouldn't even be upset at all. It would make sense to me. But Joey's never been one to take a back seat. And also, I don't think he'd have come this far and fought this shit so fucking hard. And he won. Let me tell you, this guy won. He's got the upper hand in this, not the government. And, the jury numbers can come out and they can say, 10-2, 9-3. They can say whatever the fuck they want. But the reality is that they didn't get a conviction on any of it. So the upper hand here is in Joey's hands. Whatever he does is what he does. I personally think he's going to fight it. That's what I'm being led to believe, and that's the way it should be. Would another jury decide differently? Perhaps so. But then again, there's also a lot of tapes that didn't get played in that courtroom that can get played the second time around, which can really help Joey. So if you're looking for a definitive, clear-cut answer, you're not going to get one out of me, but I'm just telling you from, here comes this phrase, from your lips to God's ears, I'm telling you, no deal. Nothing. The government may be trying to do this, but Joey's got the upper hand. Joey can do whatever the fuck he wants at this point. God bless him and his family. They've suffered enough. They've been through enough already. It's just, there was a lot of stuff at that trial that evidentiary-wise was just garbage. The way that they treated his wife in the media I thought was fucking disgusting. And Rubio doesn't really have a whole lot of room to talk. Have you ever seen the way this guy looks? Holy shit. It's like the fucking Gollum creature from Lord of the Rings. Sammy Gravano looks like him, too. It's kind of funny. But from the Merlino aspect, I think the reality is it's either getting thrown out or going back to trial. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure there's going to be more gossip that comes out. But stay tuned right here for this to get all the accurate information. I reach out to people I can find out, and that's the reality of it. Okay, one other little piece of news before we take a break and come back and do the Rizzuto Crime Family. The alleged front boss for the Genovese, Pete DiChiara, passed away. He was 75. He ran a social club in Lower Manhattan, right off 73rd Market Street since the early 1990s. He had done time for racketeering, but it had been in ill health for a long time. He was essentially the front boss for other people, who I'm not going to mention. And it's very similar to what Vincent the Chin Gigante did with Tony Salerno. They used the front boss model. That's not a bad model to use. It keeps yourself insulated as a boss, but P.D. Red has passed away, God rest his soul. And there's going to be probably a little movement in the Genovese crime family, as to be expected. But this guy was a big guy, known by a lot of people, and he suffered from diabetes and had some other health issues. So, he lived to a ripe old age, and we'll see what happens as a result with the Genoveses. But it's one guy moves and another guy steps up. That's how it always works. So that's the news we have for today. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Rizzuto crime family. And right off the bat, you need to know something about the Rizzuto crime family. This is not a biography of A, B, C, D, and E. We're going to talk about Vito Rizzuto. We're going to talk about Nicola Rizzuto. And you're going to hear some things that a lot of people don't know. So stay tuned right here to Mob Talk Radio. And when we get back from the break, we'll start the Rizzutos. I have one more bit of news. I'm gonna once we come back from the break, I'm gonna talk about that. But stay tuned to Mob Talk Radio. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Per the usual, you can follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. You can check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. The Mob Talk Radio / True Crime page blog. A guy named Scott Williams Collier and myself run the blog. Scott runs the True Crime page. Check that out on Facebook. Go to type in True Crime page. He covers all facets of crime. Has nothing to do with me. I don't run that page. That's all Scott's stuff. But I do partner with him on articles and stuff like that. We're partners in a lot of different stuff. So from that extent, and the only reason why I'm saying that is because there were accusations that were made about a lot of people that I was running True Crime page, and that was just another fake identity that I have. It's got nothing to do with me. It's Scott. Here's the clue for these idiots that are saying that. To have a co.uk address is London. You can't really have that in the United States, pinheads. Anyway, that being said, the reason why I brought the True Crime page up is because there was an article posted this morning by Scott about something that happened to him a couple of years back where he invited a guy to live with him effectively because the guy needed a place to stay, and the guy ends up committing murder. It's a very, very creepy story, a very interesting story. So please go to Twitter, Real Mob Talk 7, Mob Talk Radio on Twitter. Follow Scott on Twitter too. I think it's at True Crime page. You can read the article for yourself. It's a fantastic article. It's creepy. It's eerie. So definitely please check him out, support him, follow him. He writes good stuff. And he's like a brother from another mother from across the pond. All that being said, let's get to the Rizzuto crime family. Without emphasizing too much, the Rizzutos have often been called the sixth family of organized crime, and there's a reason for that. We're going to find that out today. So let's begin. Obviously, we're talking about Montreal, Canada, and Canada in general today, but they did have a lot of power base in the United States as well. But let's begin. Since the 1970s, the Rizzuto crime family has really been an extension of the Bonnano crime family. However, after Joey Merlino, who was the former boss of the Bonnanos, became a rat, that relationship was seriously fractured, and there's a couple of reasons for that. We'll get into that today. But from what my sources have indicated, the Gambinos have pretty much began to gain inroads into Canada as a result of that. And a lot of the Rizzuto stuff that we're going to talk about today is going to remind you of some old world shit. And I hate to use The Godfather as a reference in this because the film was very operatic and etc. But there are some parallels that can really be drawn. And the Rizzutos are not like your Gambinos in New York or the Genoveses. They're a global mob. They're not just confined to one borough. They are all over the place. So originally the Rizzutos were part of the Catroni family, but there was an internal war that broke out between the Catronis and the Rizzuto people. And what eventually ends up happening is the Rizzutos split from the Catronis and effectively render them useless and sort of take over everything in Canada. The founder, Niccolo Rizzuto, was born in 1924 in Sicily. He migrated to Montreal in 1954. Niccolo actually marries into the mob by marrying Libertina Mano, whose father was a local mafia boss in Sicily. And so in 1954, him and Libertina settle in Montreal. And the reason why they came to Montreal was he had family there, and it made the most sense for them to do that. And he also had Sicilian relatives and associates there, so it made sense to make the jump to Montreal. Niccolo began his career as an associate in the Rizzuto Crime Family, who at the time really controlled the majority of the drug trade in Montreal. And that's the big thing, the drug trade in Montreal, the drug trade in Canada. We have talked about this time and time again. It goes back to Luciano having the what we call the narcotics summit, where they effectively want to control the flow of narcotics coming from the in the Middle East and Asia through Canada into the United States through the Toronto borders, through the Buffalo borders. And effectively what Luciano wanted was he didn't want any of the American mob bosses touching it. They wanted the Sicilians to do this, and in return the Sicilians would get a cut of the profits. That has been big business, and anybody who really controls the flow from the Middle East through Canada controls a lot of money. And that was really the big money maker for the Rizzuto crime family, and eventually for the Rizzuto crime family. Also as well, Niccolo Rizzuto had a lot of ties to the Contrera mafia clan, who was from the same part of Sicily he was from. Eventually, there was going to be a power struggle that was going to form between the Catronis and the Sicilians and the Calabrese. And effectively, there's a couple of things that happened. But the first thing we need to talk about is, ultimately, at the end of the day, Niccolo Rizzuto wanted to be his own boss. And what he was doing was, behind the scenes, he was kind of making deals and not kicking up, so to speak. He was making waves where he probably shouldn't have, and it caused a lot of problems. And one of the people it caused a problem was Paolo Violi. And he was a capo in the Rizzuto crime family. And he would go back to Vic Catroni and complain that Rizzuto was acting on his own, making deals behind their backs, making ties with people behind their backs, other factions. And Rizzuto was effectively acting on his own, and that really created a serious problem. Violi knew that eventually this is going to come down to firing bullets, because there was no way that Rizzuto would back down. And I don't think he felt like maybe Vic Catroni was effectively going to go after them for it. So what Violi does is he goes to Vic Catroni at the time and asks Catroni, who had ties with the Bonnano crime family, to have the Bonnanos send soldiers to Canada immediately because war would begin. And effectively, the Bonnanos did not necessarily get involved in that. That was an issue that needed to be sort of taken up by the Catronis and the Rizzutos. In 1978, as Violi takes over being boss of the Catronis. He ends up getting killed. Even though Rizzuto was in Venezuela at the time, it's widely believed by law enforcement that Rizzuto personally killed Violi. The two factions would continue to fight. Ultimately, the Rizzutos would end up taking over. And that has always been the problem in Montreal. It's always been the problem in Hamilton, Ontario, is that the Catronis, while we're no longer in power, to make a comparison, I use it. I can go back to the Scarfo stuff, Nicky Scarfo in Philadelphia, or you go to the Stanfa, John Stanfa and Ralph Natali faction war. That's effectively what this was, but there was a lot more at stake than just to be the head people. There was a $1 billion at stake in the deal, but effectively the Rizzutos are more powerful. In 1988, Niccolo Rizzuto would be arrested in Venezuela after investigators found 700 grams of cocaine inside of Rizzuto's home. Rizzuto would get 8 years and would be paroled after 5 years after giving an $800,000 bribe to prison officials. In 1993, Niccolo Rizzuto returns to Montreal. November 26, 2006, Rizzuto gets arrested again. After a 4-year investigation, he would end up doing 2 years and be released in 2008. On February 11, 2010, Rizzuto entered a guilty plea, 2 counts of tax evasion. He was accused of hiding $5.2 million deposited in Swiss bank accounts and failing to report $728,000 in income. In November of 2010, Rizzuto was killed at his home by a sniper who was sitting in the woods outside of his house. That's big shit. It's widely been assumed that it was people from within the Rizzuto faction. It was also widely assumed that it was probably somebody who was taking a run at the top, because you got to remember, at the time Niccolo Rizzuto is there, Vito Rizzuto's in prison, okay? And so there's kind of a power struggle going on, and people took a shot, and they end up killing Rizzuto, thinking that they're going to go ahead and take over everything. That's not the way it works out for them. However, those actions spark some insanity in the Rizzuto crime family, and also it was part of the old Catroni crime family nutcases that wanted to try to retake territory. Moving right along, Vito Rizzuto, who is the son, was born in 1946 in Sicily. He essentially took control of the Rizzutos right prior to his father's death. He was sort of controlling the main operations. He was the big money guy as well. Niccolo still had control of the family, but he deferred to his son most times. But anyhow, Vito, he was smart, incredibly smart businessman, and he was epically fucking ruthless. If he thought you were a snitch, you were dead. If you fucked him over in a business deal, you were dead. If you did something to disrespect him, you were dead. That's how he operated. And he was also a capo in the Bonnano crime family. So not only is he the boss of his own crime family, but he's a captain in the Bonnano crime family. And that brings up a question. Why? What's the need? You already have business ties with the Bonnanos. You already have good, friendly ties with them. Why do you need to be a made member and a captain in their crime family? If you're a boss, to me, that's like taking a step down. And so when I was researching this, I started asking myself, now, why on God's earth would he want to be a captain in another crime family when he's the boss of his own crime family? And I can't for the life of me figure out why he felt that was a necessity. And ultimately, that's the thing that got him pinched in the end. That's what gets him arrested in the end. So that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more as the show goes on. But it vexes me. I just don't understand why he felt the need. I mean, maybe it's an ego thing. Maybe it's a money thing. Maybe it's a respect thing. But as you're going to see as we go on with the show, he really didn't need to do it. He really didn't need to do it. Anyhow, Vito oversaw a multi-trillion, not million, not billion, a multi-trillion-dollar international criminal empire that imported and distributed trillions of dollars worth of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, and hashish all over the world. Not just in Canada, folks. We're talking fucking everywhere. Rizzuto would end up laundering billions of dollars, lent out billions of dollars to loan sharking and bookmaking operations, profited big time from gambling, extortion, prostitution, pornography, weapons trafficking, sex trafficking, wildlife smuggling, labor unions, labor racketeering, fraud, and contract murder. How many mafias have you ever heard that were involved in wildlife smuggling? That's some crazy shit. He was involved. If he could make $1, he was involved. He also had a low threshold for bullshit. Like I said, would kill anybody in a heartbeat. Rizzuto single-handedly ordered the death of thousands of people. Thousands. We're not talking 10, not 15. It's widely been alleged that he killed at least 20 people on his own, but he ordered the death of thousands of others. That is some power. Now, if we're going to say that that's completely accurate, holy crap. That puts him in a league beyond anybody we've seen from the United States. Every other gang in Canada was petrified of Vito Rizzuto. Anybody who threatened his reign would be killed. He's often been called the Adolf Hitler of the Mafia because he would dispatch and kill anybody that got in his way. Anybody that he thought for a second that could hurt his business or hurt his power, he'd have him killed. It's that simple. The sixth mafia moniker, the sixth mafia family moniker is really no joke. And when we get into the facts and the numbers of how large this organization was, you're going to understand that. Rizzuto not only ran Canada, but they ruled by fear and were feared globally. They weren't just feared in Canada. They were feared in the United States. They were feared in Europe. Not many mob bosses are feared in other countries. Now, we can go back to the 60s with maybe Russell Buffalino and some other powerful guys like that, but I don't know if they had that kind of power where they shook the foundation of other people in other countries. In 2003, the DEA and the FBI listed the Rizzutos as the Canadian crew of the Bonnanos. They were completely wrong. That was the assumption, and that, if anything shows evidence towards the fact that the Rizzutos covered themselves very well, was that the FBI and DEA thought that they were just an extension of a crew of the Bonnano crime family who were from Canada. They were totally wrong in their assertion. There are more than 1 million square miles of Quebec and Ontario that's controlled or fall under the influence of the Rizzutos. 1 million square miles in Canada that either Rizzuto's controlled or it fell under the influence of them and their associates. That trumps anything that the American Mafia has ever been able to do. Now, if we're going to talk about every state the American Mafia has connections to, that's different. But we're talking about an entire fucking country. 1 million square miles. The Rizzutos also controlled every fucking border that went from Canada to any other country. If stuff was coming in from overseas into Canada, they controlled the docks there. If anything was coming from Canada to the United States, they controlled the docks there. That is a lot of power. In comparison, American mob bosses controlled a borough. Brooklyn, Staten Island, et cetera, et cetera. We all know the boroughs, right? And the American mob bosses, not only would they control a borough, but they would control a racket, construction, windows. They got this percentage of the garment industry. They have this percentage of this industry, or we have that percentage of commercial property. The Rizzutos had a global impact. The Montreal-based faction comprises of hundreds and thousands of associates. We're not talking 200 made guys here, folks. We are talking thousands. In 2003, Vito Rizzuto was indicted by a Brooklyn federal grand jury in relation to racketeering conspiracy charges, including loan sharking and murder in direct association with the 1981 murders of 3 Bonnano capos, which we know as Dominic Trinchera, Alphonse Indelicato, and Philip, I cannot pronounce his last name for the life of me. That's horrible. It's my bad note taking. So there's a third guy in there. But if you remember the scene in Donnie Brasco, where Donnie is told there's going to be a hit on 3 captains, and they effectively make him wait outside, and then there's the scene where they're in there chopping up the bodies. That is directly taken from something from this indictment by the Brooklyn federal grand jury with Vito Rizzuto. Rizzuto was one of 4 gunmen that were hired by Joey Merlino to kill the 3 captains. Merlino feared that Indelicato, Trinchera, and Chacon, I cannot believe I wrote this wrong. Anyway, Philip, Dominic Trinchera, and Alphonse Indelicato. Merlino's real beef was he was afraid that they were going to try to make a power run. He felt like they were going to try to undermine him and take over the family, and he couldn't have that, especially after Philip Rusty Rastelli went to prison. Merlino felt like he had to do something, and so he ends up making sure that they take care of the situation. And if I believe correctly, There was a sit-down that took place in Brooklyn, and effectively Trinchera and Delicato walk in, and Rizzuto and his buddies were hiding in the closet, and as soon as they came into the main room, closet door goes open, closet door pops open, and the murder spree begins. Now, one of the questions you got to ask yourself is this. If Vito Rizzuto is the boss of the Montreal Mafia, why on God's earth is he in New York doing a mob hit for Joey Merlino? Now, maybe Merlino uses them because they're from out of the country, so they figure, hey, we'll bring zips over from another country. It'll be no big deal because they'll suspect that it's other guys that are here in New York, but it still doesn't make sense to me if Rizzuto is a mob boss for him to take part in that. I don't think it was a smart move. I don't understand it, but I think it was probably a favor to Merlino just to keep relations good. However, on January 20th of 2004, Rizzuto gets arrested in Montreal. After a legal battle which lasted 30-plus months, Rizzuto was extradited to the United States. Joey Merlino had already become a rat and given them all the information they needed, and he would end up testifying against Rizzuto, as did Merlino's piece of shit brother-in-law, Sal Vitale, who was also one of the shooters in the crime. So here you go. Rizzuto does Merlino a favor. Merlino ends up testifying. Sal Vitale ends up testifying, who was also one of the shooters in that deal, and effectively that's going to put Rizzuto in some shit. May 4th, 2007, Rizzuto admitted he pled guilty to being present at the murders, but didn't admit taking part in them. As a part of his plea deal, he received 10 years, followed by a 3-year supervised release. He ended up doing his time at ADX in Florence, and he was released October 5th, 2012, and was deported to Toronto. Now, what happened in between 2007 and when he was released in 2012 was this. Not only was his father whacked, but his own son was whacked by people in the Rizzutos, and people that were in the Catroni family were going to try to take over. With Rizzuto in prison, they felt like he didn't have the strength and the power to really keep control of the family, so they kill his father and they kill his son. And that's going to set up a chain of events when Rizzuto gets out. That has very much been the way Montreal is handled even today. Rizzuto knew when he went to prison that war would be imminent, and while he was incarcerated, his oldest son, Niccolo Jr., was assassinated December 28th of 2009. His brother-in-law and consigliere, Paolo Renda, disappeared on May 20th, 2010. His body has never been found. Also, Agostino Contreras was killed in broad daylight 10 days later on May 30th, 2010. And then on November 10th, 2010, his father, Niccolo, is whacked. Shortly after Rizzuto gets back from prison, he goes right to the mattresses. He suspects a lot of people are involved with what happened. He wants to sort of avenge his son and his father and anybody else that had disappeared, and he wasn't fucking around. Within 3 months of Rizzuto arriving back in Montreal, several men get killed in what law enforcement and the FBI alleges, which is retribution. Drug dealer Emilio Corleone, Tony Jensdale, and Muhammad Awada were all killed as a result of participating or being assumed to have participated in the kidnapping of a Vito Rizzuto ally. In November of 2012, Joe DiMaio, who was an influential mobster, was suspected of setting up the hits on the Rizzutos along with Reynald Desjardins and Sally Montagna, and all three of them were killed in the driveway of DiMaio's home. Vito Rizzuto suspected that they were involved, and he pressed the button. Before Christmas of 2012, a gunman entered the coffee shop of an incarcerated Rizzuto rival, Joe DeVito, killing Dominic Facchini and critically wounding another. So once again, not long after November, bang, a month later, boom, he's got another hit going on. In 2013, Reynald Desjardins, his brother-in-law, Gaetan Gosselin, was killed in front of his home, as was Vincenzo Scuderi, who was an associate of Joe DeVito. So automatically right now you're seeing what's happening. Rizzuto suspects it's this guy, and not only is he going to kill that guy, but he's going to kill that guy's fucking associate and his partner as well. We're talking, 10, 12 murders in a span of, 3, 4, 5 months here? That's 2 a month. And it didn't stop. Salvatore Calaudi and Moreno Gallo had a falling out with Rizzuto also in November. Both were murdered. Calaudi was shot in the head, and he was suspected of actually shooting Niccolo Rizzuto, and Gallo, who had effectively already been deported out of the country and was hanging out down in Mexico, was found, and he was shot and killed. During this spree, and we're talking about 12 prior, 13, let's say 13 prior, after the 13 that I sort of mentioned, 21 other murders would happen, and every single one of them were unsolved to this day. So we're talking a matter of, let's do the math, 1, 3, so that's 34 people were killed in this span of 5 fucking months by Vito Rizzuto as retribution for his son being killed and his father being killed. February 11th of 2005, an arrest warrant for Vito Rizzuto was issued in Rome, Italy, and basically it was a connection with the mafia's involvement in building the Strait of Messina Bridge, which effectively was a bridge that connected the Italian mainland with Sicily. It was the biggest public works project in Italy's history, and of course, you know how the mafia is. They want to kick back from cement, they want to kick back from labor, and effectively Rizzuto allegedly got involved in that, and that created a problem for him. But then on December 23rd of 2013, Vito Rizzuto ends up dying of natural causes. Now, I know that that's not specifically the biography that you wanted to hear, but I have a couple of other things that I sort of kind of want to go over, and it's important that you understand this. Obviously, I could do a whole entire show on Vito Rizzuto. I could do a whole entire show on his father, the grandson, and we could go on and on and on. But the Rizzuto crime family, to grasp the understanding of how different they are from maybe American mob families, is you really have to look at the model that's over in Europe. Swig of coffee, hold on. Great coffee, Cafe Bustelo, I love it. But looking at the way that the mafia in Italy is structured like clans, little subgroups, big subgroups, but they're not all in the same organization. It's the same structure, the same principles, but every little place has different things. Napoli's got something. Calabria's got something. Sicily's got something. You have just got every subgroup you could possibly imagine, and they fight and they war. Some of them are allies, some of them are enemies. But the way that Montreal was structured was it's very, very clannish in the way it's organized. And when the Catroni and Rizzuto war happens and the Rizzutos take over, Catroni always was very, very fucking bitter about the way Niccolo Rizzuto took over. I don't think it was necessarily, he felt, and I'm not speaking for him, but I can imagine that he felt like, I brought this fucking guy around this stuff, and he gets too big for his britches, and now he wants to take over. And ultimately, the Rizzutos did. So there was a lot of hangover from that. There were a lot of former Catroni guys that would refuse to go to work for Rizzuto because they hated him for what he did and felt like, he did some underhanded shit. So you had two different factions, but the problem was the Rizzutos were so fucking powerful that whatever was left of Catroni had to sort of stay out of it and kind of be quiet and do their own thing. And there was always a long-drawn hostility. And even to this day, you still see them shooting each other in the streets. Just let's go back to June, what is that? May through about August of last year. It was almost every fucking day in the paper in Montreal and in Ontario, somebody was getting clipped because with Vito Rizzuto dead, the other son effectively under trial with Solicito for racketeering and gangsterism, all hell was breaking loose. And not only do you have the Calabrians making moves, you have other groups like the Hells Angels making moves, you have Ndrangheta making moves, who they all long before sort of were allies. But the minute that the power looks like the power is gone, there's going to be a struggle. There's going to be a power vacuum. And that's effectively what has happened in Montreal. Every little fucking sub-crime group that you could possibly imagine says, okay, now we're going to try to do this. But you also have the Catronis that are left. And that's perfect time for them to make inroads with these other groups and say, let's take over Montreal. Let's take over Ontario. The Rizzutos are done. And I had even reported that the Rizzutos were done because I didn't feel like they could hold on to the power base while the whole entire hierarchy of the Rizzutos themselves were fucking gone. And that's still what you have going on today. And it's an Italian thing. It's different than the American thing. You know, American families fight over turf and they fight over, money and disrespect. This group fights over $1 trillion racket. And you had better believe that everybody and their mother wants to control that racket. So let's look at some facts, because facts are good. Some of the alliances the Rizzutos had was obviously the Sicilian Mafia, the Camorra, and Ndrangheta. They had inroads to Chicago, Philadelphia, New Orleans, to the Trafficante crime family, the Buffalo crime family, the Buffalino crime family, the Cleveland Mafia, the Los Angeles Mafia, which is now defunct, Detroit, the DeCavalcantes of New Jersey, the Patriarcha crime family of Rhode Island, and all 5 families of New York. Let me read this again, just so that you understand how powerful they were. They were big and they were global. But when you add the Sicilian Mafia, the Camorra, Ndrangheta, Chicago, Philadelphia, New Orleans, the Santos Trafficante crime family, the Buffalo crime family, the Buffalino crime family, the Cleveland mob, the Los Angeles mob, the Detroit mob, the Cavalcantes of Jersey, the Patriarcha crime family, and then all 5 families of the mob. They were powerful and fearsome and just terrified the shit out of people without all of those allies. Add the allies to the mix and you got something that's just fucking unstoppable. And that's the other thing. Go back in time and look at how much infiltration the Montreal Mafia has had from either law enforcement or indictments versus American Mafia. Totally different. Totally different. One of the things that Vito Rizzuto did was he consolidated power and his reach using the Hells Angels. He used them as enforcers. He used them as hitmen. On Vito Rizzuto's orders alone, it's alleged that the Hells Angels killed 10,000 people at his behalf. When you control motorcycle gangs and control the small gangs, the street corner gangs, you have a fucking army. The territories, Montreal, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Sicily, Cuba, United Arab Emirates, England, Switzerland, the Bahamas, Haiti, Mexico. When you have that much territory, once again, Montreal, Toronto, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Sicily, Cuba, United Arab Emirates, England, Switzerland, the Bahamas, Haiti, and Mexico. Yes, the mafia is in Haiti, the mafia is in the Bahamas, and Mexico. When you have territories beyond Canada, beyond Europe, into these places, you have consolidated your fucking power. The rivals at the time was the Sedano group, the Catronis, Camiso, Andrina. And now, likely, that's changed. And the reason why I say that changed is because there's very much a power struggle going on in Montreal yet again. I don't think that the Hells Angels are powerful enough to take that. They're evil enough and they're vicious enough and violent enough, absolutely, to take over. But I think what you're going to see now is the Calabrians, Ndrangheta, people that were once allies of the Rizzutos, are likely the ones that were behind the power vacuum to begin with. They're likely the ones who supported the murder of Niccolo Rizzuto and Nick Jr. Because everybody wants the trade. Everybody wants that power. Everybody wants the money that comes from drugs. And that's reality. When it's $1 trillion business, we're not talking about $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. Trillions. And so moving right along, here's some more facts for you. Rizzuto had 500,000 made men. Not 120 like the Genoveses, not 150 like the Gambinos or vice versa. 500,000. 800,000 hitmen and associates. 1.3 million total. When you have 1.3 million people involved in your organization, that's not a crew, that's a fucking army. 500,000 made men. You could take every single fucking made guy in New York and associate in New York and probably wouldn't even come close to 100,000. You could take everybody from every fucking United States state that where the mob has infiltrated. Philadelphia, New Orleans, Chicago, Florida, New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Kansas City, fucking Detroit, California. You could take every fucking mob crew and family in the United States, and I don't even think you'd come close to 500,000 made guys. Never mind 800,000 hitmen and associates. That shows you the strength and the power of the Rizzuto crime family. And that's why I scratch my fucking head when I'm like, why on God's earth would he want to be a capo in the Bonnanos? Surely he probably had power enough to handle Joey Merlino if he really wanted to. But let's talk about the crimes: sex trafficking, fraud, bank robbery, cement, diamond smuggling, aircraft hijacking, truck hijacking, waste management, hotels, restaurants, stores, casinos, stock markets, steel workers, and get this, nuclear weapons trafficking. What other fucking mob family do you know that traffics nuclear weapons from country to country? That's global. But here's the argument I'm going to have. And this is a good argument, and because this is what people will say to me, and I already know it. If he was that powerful, why did everybody bow down and kiss his ass? Why didn't he control the United States as well if he was that big? And that's a really good question. And that's not to say that the things that I've said aren't true. I believe that that is the case. But I also think that when you use something like nuclear weapons trafficking, obviously you're not talking Vito Rizzuto's out there, haggling over nuclear warheads. But anybody that's associated to the group in another country, which can be traced back with an association, that's why those crimes are included. You know what I mean? But that's just insanity to me, that they were that strong. The Rizzutos effectively ended the relationship with the Bonnanos after Joey Merlino killed Gerlando Sciascia without permission. Merlino thought that Gerlando Sciascia was sort of just making inroads and ratting, so they kill him. And the Rizzutos were a little pissed the fact that Merlino killed him. And then they didn't even offer a tribute for killing him. And so that's what really made Rizzuto say, you know what, fuck Joey Merlino. And then obviously moving ahead, we know that Big Joey ends up ratting him out. But that's what effectively ruined the relationship. Now, is the relationship still there? Absolutely. However, it's not like it was, and it never will be what it was. The Gambinos have begun to move into Canada a bit, and so I think that what you may see, and this is my speculation, at some point you're going to see jockeying for that border, because drugs are a big moneymaker for the mob and for a lot of groups. If you control the border, you control the price, you control the flow. The problem is, go south towards Mexico, and what you're seeing the cartels do now is they're manufacturing here. See, back in the day, they weren't manufacturing here. Frank Lucas, went over to fucking Vietnam to get his shit and import it in using the military. The hashish and just the potency of the drugs were high, especially opiates coming from Afghanistan. And back in the day, they controlled everything from Corsica to France to Afghanistan to Montreal to Buffalo. Everything was controlled, even down in Florida with Traficante, California, etc. But what you're seeing now with the cartels down in Mexico is they're manufacturing. once you begin the manufacturing in a country like Mexico, who obviously has a reach to every single state in the United States and into other countries, that's a big problem, because what ends up happening is they can flood the market with their junk and they can control the price. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this works, because if you look at the upper half of the United States, if drugs are coming in through Buffalo and Canada into the United States that way from the top, but then from the bottom you have the Sinaloa cartel and the other cartels manufacturing in the country and shooting up. Obviously, if they're manufacturing, right, they can lower the prices because they're not taking a ton of risk. They are taking a ton of risk shipping it into the States, but it's easier for them. So they can make probably not the same quality, but they can control the price. And if they can undercut the other groups from Italy, from Corsica to France, into the United States, now what you're going to have is a really interesting situation. And so I think on the back end of this, there's probably a deal. I know for a fact El Chapo had deals with the mafia. I know that Griselda Blanco had deals with the mafia. Pablo Escobar had deals with the mafia. So there's a lot of business that transpires through them. When Niccolo Rizzuto Jr. was killed while Vito was locked up, naturally, the power struggle began, and obviously members of the Catroni family joined the fray to kill the Rizzutos. There's always going to be that ambivalence. There's always going to be that hatred. And the problem is the issue is always going to be is that, especially the ones that the Rizzutos faced back then and the ones they face today, is losing control of the market on drugs and narcotics trafficking. If they lose that, then that's an epic problem for them. An epic problem for them. Moving right along, according to my sources, Leonardo Rizzuto and Stefano Solicito are still in control of the Rizzutos. They're using a two-power structure there. Both were recently, and I acknowledged this earlier, both were recently acquitted of racketeering and gangsterism charges. But the problem has been mafia upheaval in Montreal. Both Rizzuto and Solicito tried to organize loose clans of the mafia in Montreal and have absolutely failed. And a lot of that's because they are at war. They have also tried to bring the Hells Angels back into the fold, as well as really small street gangs. And when I say street gangs, I can only reference American street gangs like the Crips, the Bloods, and that hasn't worked either. A lot of people are scared. They don't want to get involved in the war. And the thing is that the murdering sort of came to a standstill for the last 2 or 3 months, and I think a lot of that has to deal with people on the outside that are involved in it. We're watching how the Rizzuto and Solicito trial went. The fact that Solicito and Rizzuto are out, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to reorganize, restructure, and continue to go on business as usual, or they're going to go to fucking war, and they're going to have revenge for those that were killed, because there was an awful lot of murder going on the last couple of months. They're going to avenge what has happened on the streets while they were incarcerated, because obviously while they're incarcerated, they can't reach out and tap somebody. So all that being said, you also have to look at the hierarchy has changed. Vito Rizzuto was like a trillionaire, huge moneymaker, controlled everything. And once the torch gets passed from father to son, son to son, it has a tendency of losing not the respect, but just the intelligence, the old school way of thinking. And with each passing boss that comes, the grip that they have, the firm control that they have, you lose a little bit of that. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen as a result of this. But I think the general consensus would be is at some point, all of these different factions are going to fight for leadership. Now, have the Rizzutos totally been destroyed? Absolutely not. But like I said earlier, with the 500,000 made men and 800,000 hitmen and associates, those are not numbers current, to my belief. I think that those numbers are probably going back about 20, 25 years. So you could almost maybe cut those estimates in half, but that's still an insane amount of people. The Rizzutos also have a lot of internal issues going on. A lot of guys may not agree with how the family is being run. They may not agree with the war that's going on, but there's too many moving parts in this for it to stay silent for very long. The Calabrians, other Sicilian factions, Ndrangheta, that are rooted in Hamilton and in Toronto are trying to vie for power. And so what you're going to see, it's I think, a viable powder keg. We've talked about that before, and I think the reality is whoever controls, and we've heard this in films and stuff, whoever controls the drugs controls the money. Whoever controls the money controls the fucking power. Whoever has the power controls an army. And that's the way it is. So when you look at the Rizzuto crime family, even though I didn't go A, B, C, D, and E, and this happened in 1924, which led to this, the reality is that the belief that they are not a sixth family of the mafia, the belief that they are just a small crew of the Bonannos, or were, is bullshit. They controlled everything. How many mafia clans do you know are in the United Arab Emirates? Let's be honest. Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, come on. Their reach is massive. Their numbers are massive. The amount of money that they make is massive. They ran the Catroni out of town, but as we're seeing now, the Catroni are coming back. You have other factions that want to vie for control. But I think ultimately why you haven't seen a total takeover of the Rizzuto crime family is probably because those numbers are insane. But that's where we're sort of left. And going from here on out, does Montreal continue just business as usual? Or do the murders begin again since Solicito and Rizzuto are out? I think if you're an odds maker, I think 50-50 would be fair, but I think it's more 70-30 that war will break out. They have to retain a huge grip because while Solicito and Rizzuto were locked up, a lot of the upper class or upper echelon guys in Rizzuto's were killed. I mean, there was like bloodshed in the street every day for months. And it's all controlled the drug traffic. That's what it's all about, the drugs and everything else. The drugs is $1 trillion market for them. And if they can't hold those ties, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But the idea that, and I'm not saying that Montreal is better than New York. It's not what I'm saying at all. But when you break it down to, Carlo Gambino has Carlo Gambino crime family. They control a certain amount of rackets. They control a certain amount of territory. They're not global. Vito Genovese, not global. Vincent the Chin Gigante, not global. John Gotti, not global. Vito Rizzuto, global. Niccolo Rizzuto, global. When you're global, you're like a fucking CEO of a conglomerate. It's just insane. Now, whether or not they still have that sort of power remains to be seen. I don't believe they do, but that's just because trend and ebb and flow. I think things change, but I think definitely to even make a comparison like Frank Costello being quite the politician's politician and owning politician judges and Tammany Hall and what have you, I think that's a lot of power. But man, when you control countries, that's something completely fucking different. And so that's the Rizzuto crime family. That's where we're at. Not a lot is known about them. Not a lot is talked about them. I know that from my perspective, from people that cover that sort of genre here, really don't talk about Montreal. There's a reason not to, obviously. But like I said, it's an interesting topic to me because it's interesting to see how it operates in different countries. The mob in Italy is completely different than what you see here in New York. They're more vicious. They don't fuck around. These are people that kill politicians. They kill judges. They kill journalists. They don't give a fuck. Here, things are a little different. They operate in a different sense. And that's just the reality of the two differences. But if you were going to make a comparison to what the Rizzutos to the American Mafia, big difference. The Rizzutos are more like in other countries than they are the American Mafia. And they called Vito Rizzuto the Teflon Don because nothing could stick. It's an interesting moniker to use because I think we had somebody here, John Gotti, Teflon Don. And that's the Rizzutos. So, that's going to be the show for today. Next week, I am taking a week off. I got something I got to take care of. We'll be back with probably a Q&A and a bunch of other stuff. We are going to start going live. We are going to start taking callers. Send your threats, your complaints, your compliments, and your harassment, whatever it is, your memes, whatever it is you want to do to @RealMobTalk7. If you have any questions you want me to answer, message me on Facebook, Mob Talk Radio, or you can message me on Twitter @RealMobTalk7. I'll try to answer your questions to the best of my ability anyway. I would have rather, honestly, looking back, I would have rather done a show where I cover like Nicolo for a show, then Vito for a show, then Nicky Jr. for a show. But I think the idea when I thought about doing this immediately was like to make a comparison, because I think a lot of people don't understand how Montreal operates. A lot of people don't understand, like, maybe they just assume, oh, it's like the Gambino crime family. It's not. Totally different. And how they operate. And when you hear globally and you hear 500,000 made men, 800,000 hitmen and associates, that should be an eye-opener. And not a lot of people cover it. So maybe down the line we'll do another show like this where we get more in depth with each person. As usual, if you guys have a topic or a suggestion, you know where to send them. Other than that, I want everybody to have a great week. Thank you for, excuse me, thank you for putting up with my ranting at the very beginning of the show. And there's going to be less and less of that. But once we go to, wow, excuse me, once we go to live shows, and call-ins, things will be a little different. We're going to reorganize the show a little bit. Also, Scott is, my business partner, Scott William Collier, is coming out with a true crime blog or vlog YouTube channel. I will be participating in that. It's not necessarily going to be mafia-related. It's going to be sort of like serial killer and like Ted Bundy type of shit. Unsolved murders, I would believe. So I'm going to be involved in that in some capacity, but I'm always going to do Mob Talk. I'm even going to have Scott on as a guest on Mob Talk, probably to talk about the Cray twins, or even Dominic Noonan, just to kind of give me the angle of British gangsterism over on the other side of the pond, because that's a lot of things Americans don't really get to hear about, and what's better than getting Scott on the radio? You can hear his British accent and him talking about the mafia and gangsters and how that operates over in Europe. So it's a different perspective. So I also have guests coming on in a couple of weeks. I shouldn't say weeks. It's probably going to be a month or two. So we've got a lot going on with the show. Just stick with us. It's going to get better and better and better. Have a great week, everybody. And I will check in with you not next Saturday, because we're going to take off. But any messages or complaints, concerns you have, send them over to me and we'll get to it. Thanks for listening to the show, everybody. Have a great week.